Welcome back to the 2022 APAICS Tech Summit. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Congresswoman Grace Meng. Congresswoman Meng is serving her fifth term in the United States House of Representatives, serving the 6th Congressional District of New York. She is the first and only Asian American member of Congress from New York State and the first female Congress member from Queens since former vice presidential nominee Geraldine Ferraro. Throughout her career, Congresswoman Meng has been a fierce advocate for expanding access to essential services and resources, including broadband internet for underserved communities. We are excited Congresswoman Meng has taken time to provide remarks on broadband access. Please give her a warm welcome.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Grace Meng from Queens, New York. Thank you, Madeline and APAICS, for the invitation to share a few words. I'm honored to kick off today's panel discussion on challenges to broadband access, from infrastructure to digital literacy. Broadband access and digital literacy are important to thriving in today's world. We have seen an exponential growth in internet use in the US, which nearly doubled from 50% in the year 2000 to 93% by 2021. Millions of adults and students use the internet for school, staying in touch with loved ones, and applying for jobs. The access and literacy parts may seem unrelated, but both are central to closing the digital divide. Before COVID-19 consumed our nation, we knew that Americans, particularly those from low-income, minority, and rural communities, were struggling to participate in the digital ecosystem. For some, it was cost, and others, it was lack of access preventing them from fully participating in the 21st century. The pandemic exacerbated these issues, especially for students who lacked home broadband access to continue their studies from their kitchen tables or sofas. When our nation went on pause and sent students home, it was estimated that nearly 16 million students lacked access, meaning they missed out completely on their studies. In those dark days, they couldn't go to their local library or catch a free Wi-Fi signal from a local eatery. Their learning simply stopped. This was unacceptable. That's why I led the charge to create the over $7 billion Emergency Connectivity Fund at the FCC with Senator Markey that was part of the American Rescue Plan. No student should forego an education simply because they lack internet access. Thanks to my effort, millions of students and library patrons enjoy broadband access right from their homes. But due to the immense popularity and demand of this fund, it has run out of money. I'm working with Senator Markey and Van Hollen. We know how important this program is, and we know that this program must continue to ensure that no one is left offline. We recently sent a letter to Leader Schumer and Speaker Pelosi, urging them to replenish the fund. You can count on me to continue leading efforts in Congress to close the digital divide. Thanks again for having me, and I wish you a wonderful panel discussion.
Thank you for your leadership, Congresswoman Meng. Our second panel of the day, Challenges to Broadband Access from Infrastructure to Digital Literacy, will continue to touch on the subject of Congresswoman Meng's remarks. This panel will discuss the physical and social infrastructure that needs to be considered in order to enable the opportunities that high-speed internet can bring, particularly for underserved communities. I'd like to introduce Tu Nguyen, who serves as Executive Director for OCA National. A graduate from Rice University with degrees in chemistry and sociology, Tu found her way into the nonprofit sector through organizing Asian American students on campus and bridging partnerships between student groups and local Houston community organizations. Thank you, Tu, for moderating this important conversation.
The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the huge digital divide in low-income and other minority communities. Within that, two big subgroups that were impacted were students and elders. We saw the ISP industry, both cable and wireless companies, quickly mobilize to provide affordable broadband connections and step up in creative ways to alleviate the exacerbated digital divide we saw among students, elders, and small businesses. Today, we'll discuss with industry and community leaders what barriers we continue to see and what the next steps towards closing the digital divide. So to introduce our panel, first up, we have Anais Carmona, who serves as the Director of Federal Legislative Affairs for T-Mobile. In this capacity, Anais is responsible for representing T-Mobile's federal legislative interests before members of Congress on issues related to telecommunications and technology. Next, we have Annie Chung, who oversees and manages a Bay Area community-based organization called Self-Help for the Elderly that provides a comprehensive range of health, educational, social, and recreational services to over 40,000 seniors a year in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that's expanded to, of course, digital literacy as well. Next, we have Emilio Gonzalez, who's the Executive Director for Public Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Verizon, where he manages a wide-ranging external affairs portfolio and leads several internal strategic initiatives. And last but not least, we have Alka Patel, who currently serves as the Vice President of Government and External Affairs for Comcast in the Keystone region, focusing on advancing digital equity, having accrued over 20 years of experience working at the intersection of technology, business, law across private, academic, and government sectors. So thank you all for taking the time out of your day to discuss this really important and relevant topic to our community, especially the Asian American Pacific Islander community as well. Just to put it in context, over the past few years, we've seen companies such as yourselves here represented put out low-cost internet plans. And we've also seen the government, federal government, go from having the emergency broadband benefit during the pandemic to now implementing the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP, of which there are now over 12 million enrolled, I believe. But we also know that about 48 million Americans qualify for ACP. So from this panel's perspective, what are the barriers to broadband access for minority communities right now? And we'll start with you, Alka.
Great, thank you, Thu, and welcome everyone, and really honored and excited to be here with all of you as well as this distinguished panel, so appreciate it. So, it's a great question. It's a question that I think all of us think about who are in the space all the time. I think oftentimes the topic around adoption sort of falls into a couple of different, or barriers, I should say, falls into a couple of different buckets. So one around access, the other around affordability, and then the third piece being around adoption. And so just sort of speaking from a Comcast lens for a quick second here, especially with the pandemic, access was top of mind for us. And so we were really mindful around making sure that we had the opportunity to make sure that community centers and places where communities congregated had access through our Lift Zones program, as well as some of our hotspots. In regards to affordability, and I know Annie, I'm sure will probably address this as well, but we ensured, and we've had, frankly, a product that's been a low-cost product for over 10 years now, our Internet Essentials product. But I think it came to a lot of light during COVID to make sure, in terms of affordability, that our communities were also connected. And then, frankly, adoption is what we found as one of the biggest barriers. So earlier this year, I should say summertime this year, Comcast worked with the Boston Consulting Group, and we commissioned a study to really think about what is this barrier, what does it look like? And the focus was on adoption. And what came to light from this report was really a focus on the fact that digital navigators, could play a significant role in helping with adoption. So what do we mean by adoption, for example? So we are talking about helping communities who are not initially connected, get connected through a trusted partner. So trust, especially for our minority communities, is a critical factor. So organizations like Annie's out there are trusted partners to help bridge the gap, to have these minority communities understand what it means to be connected, how to get connected, get the skills that they need around this. What we also learned from this report is that in regards to trust, we really need to be talking about adoption from a holistic perspective. So it isn't just about how do we get connected, but how do we help meet the different basic needs of these individuals in these communities. So we're talking about whether it be around housing, childcare, education. And so once we've sort of addressed this holistically and thinking about the individual with all of their collective needs, we've built that trust, in which case now, all right, let's talk about connectivity to really take you to the next step to be part of the digital economy and really have the economic mobility. And so programs, again, like what Self-Help and Annie is doing are really critical to building those that trust factor and developing digital navigators to help with the adoption piece.
Thank you, Alka. And I totally agree. I mean, OCA, our organization works with all of the partners here on the panel to also provide information to our members and community about like their different affordable internet plans. And I think that's been also super helpful to hear from OCA. And so Annie, I want to hear from you then, what was the programming like, and what are some of the barriers that you're seeing your community in the Bay Area, the seniors you serve, their barriers to adoption, and what have you been working on for that? Yeah.
Thank you too, and thank you, Tanya and APAICS, for putting this panel together. Closing the digital divide has been one of our top priorities, and this is our 56th anniversary for Self-Help for the Elderly. So you could imagine for the past 30 years, we've been really working towards closing the divide. And thanks to Comcast, when they came out with the Internet Essentials program, they didn't just come up with the affordability for a lot of the low-income students, families, and seniors to get connected, but they also enable the community-based organizations like Self-Help and like a few other CBOs to teach the community how to navigate, how to use the internet, and how to use the different devices that they have. We were always joking a little bit that usually for lower income seniors and families, their devices are hand-me-downs. Like they don't go and buy a new device, right? But they were given a device that sometimes a little bit couldn't really be used because either it's too old or they didn't have the right software. So I think that Comcast provided us a partnership that is quite amazing. Through the past over 10 years, they've provided ongoing support for a minimum of 40 such internet classes to be taught in the community to the people who just signed up with the Internet Essentials. So now, just as Elka said, you not only have the affordable access, but now you have the opportunity to give them basic training and skills. And then the third very important element is the content. So for limited English proficiency community, right, we call them the LEPs. For these communities, they really needed someone to help bridge that divide by providing the right content culturally as well as linguistically. So with the three, we call it the ABCs of the digital divide, and working with companies like Comcast and other telecom carriers, as well as the government. You talked about the ACP program earlier, and that's a very, very important program. And ever since the program was introduced, our community have connected over, I just looked up the statistic, 971 seniors to get on the ACP so that they don't lose the chance, right, to get the $30 to pay for the internet. So I think all this helped us close the divide a little bit, but it's an ongoing process. And we have to continue to look to government, industries, as well as the community to help our community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the language barrier is an important piece because even when we're trying to outreach about ACP in our own communities, sometimes the only thing that gets across is that it's an affordable internet plan, and people don't even know that there's actually like a discount for devices, right? That's part of ACP. And so there's just a lot more in-language resources that are needed. We'll go to you, Anais. What have you been seeing as barriers for adoption, which is being highlighted as one of the highest barriers here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we all have issues with affordability, reliability, accessibility. For T-Mobile, we've really built our business around meeting our customer where they are. And what this means is it's been reported that Latino, Black, and other minority groups use wireless as their first and sometimes only lifeline to the internet. And so we over-index, our communities do over-index on mobile use for our daily life. And that we take as a huge responsibility. So T-Mobile brands currently serve, I think, about 95% of Black consumers, 96% of Hispanic consumers, and 98% of Asian consumers nationwide. And so with the pandemic at the forefront, and T-Mobile's kind of creative way of price planning, we have provided a plan literally for everyone, whether it's prepaid or postpaid or close to close the digital divide, but to also give our communities a chance to compete in the digital economy, whether that's a small business or a marginalized community, which is key. So our mission is really to ensure that all Americans are connected, regardless of geography, demographics, and income. And affordability is a huge part of that. At the beginning of the pandemic, for example, in March of 2020, T-Mobile launched not one, but two lower priced plans, one at $15 a plan for 2 gigabytes of data, and another one for $25 that included 5 gigabytes of smartphone data. So if you think about it, a $25 and a $15 plan goes a long way for those communities that are really in need. And this year, we also expanded our Connect by T-Mobile offerings by launching the lowest industry priced prepaid plan with talk, text, and high-speed data starting at just $10 a month. So, you can't go to the grocery store and buy, in most cities, a coffee for that. And we think that that's something that is equitable because people need this resource. And then for our older customers, I know that was something that was previously talked about. We also amped up our family plans. We currently offer a subsidized plan for seniors and for our customers that are older than 55. And that also includes active duty military and veterans, which are crucial to our society. And this includes our highest discount, which is about 50% off family lines. And also just, at a time when inflation is going up and our competitors are raising prices, we are the only ones, or one of the only ones, committed to sticking to our affordable options. In May of just this year, just to bring peace to the mind of those communities and those customers who rely on our service for their day-to-day, we announced our price lock guarantee, which is a commitment to customers who are joining T-Mobile or are switching, that we won't raise the price of their wireless service. And we think that goes a long way. So accessibility was another thing that we discussed. And, we went into communities during the pandemic and before and provided hotspots, jobs, low-cost products that were probably the most competitive and lowest in the business. And we came up with creative ways to address those customer pain points. So as you know, and as a partner to APAICS, we launched Project 10 Million, which is a 5-year, $10.7 billion effort to close the digital divide in the homework gap by offering these school districts free internet access, mobile hotspots to serve up to, more than 10 million eligible households. And to date, it is really exciting to tell you that T-Mobile has connected an astounding 3.2 million students thus far. I know linguistics was one of the things that we discussed, and we meet the customer where they are. At our T-Mobile stores, we have specific employees that have linguistic capabilities. I know there's one store in the Bronx, for example, that are cumulatively our employees speak up to 18 languages. So you're able to explain the services, products in their native language, which we think is really, really key. And, one of the things that has come out of this pandemic and the need for connectivity and has contributed to closing the digital divide is T-Mobile's partnerships with organizations to identify what those needs are, but also creative product launching, like the launching of our 5G in-home broadband, which is the first of its kind, a $50 a month, up to 50% savings. So when you're really talking about T-Mobile and what we're doing, not only pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, but after, it's clear that we're in the community. It's clear that the digital divide is an imperative business pillar of what we do, and we take that responsibility very seriously.
No, so we've seen the federal government step up, and they've provided $65 billion via the infrastructure bill for a program called Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment, also known as BEAD, which is done via the NTIA. And we've talked a lot about, or we've mentioned adoption a lot. And Anis, you've mentioned a little bit about, neighborhoods and wireless, communities over-indexing as wireless. So there's a lot that needs to be discussed between local, state, federal governments, what they're doing, and then also what the industry is doing. I want to I want us to talk about like what needs to happen between the two sides to speed up and work more quickly towards the closure of the digital divide. So we'll go to you, Emilio. What are you seeing that needs to happen between the different levels of government and the industry, the support that both sides need?
Thank you, Thu, and thank you to APAICS for pulling this event together. This is a timely and important conversation. At the onset, let me just say that Verizon provided a very robust response to the pandemic, which put a spotlight on the digital divide, and it included everything from $10 million in grants to small businesses, to working with school districts to provide discounted Wi-Fi hotspots that serve 30 million students across the country, to something I'm very proud of, which was a $15 million donation to the Stop AAPI Hate initiative, which is also a sad reality as a result of this pandemic. Shifting gears to your question, building networks, whether they be fiber or small cell 5G networks, is a really complex endeavor. You have to lay out capital many years in advance, design these networks, test them, etc. When you start to deploy these networks, you have to deal with state and local governments, predominantly local municipalities. And I've seen organizational charts of what this looks like, and it's extremely complex. But I think there's some key things that have to happen in order to deploy equitably and quickly. And one of those is strategic partnerships with the municipality, with the advocate nonprofit community, just like Annie was mentioning, and that there be compromise in the negotiations so that we can reach win-win situations on things like right-of-ways, access to poles where we would attach these small cells that now comprise what are 5G networks. What are going to be the fees, regulations? Can we access a building where a building owner might have an exclusive agreement with a provider? And if that building owner says we cannot access that building, that's it. We can't get in there to provide service and alternatives for consumers. I think there are great examples of municipalities that have brought all this together, and we have been able to quickly deploy and put out, for example, fixed wireless through 5G, or even in the 4G LTE world. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, we don't get to flip a switch and we have a new network. It requires time, capital, compromise, and partnerships.
Thank you, Emilio. And Alka, I want you to weigh in on this as well, and kind of what, with technology kind of developing so quickly, right? I feel like we just had LTE for 4G LTE, and now we're already at 5G. So what kind of like timeline are we looking at? And, with all these grants coming out, I know also via states, like, does that help speed up the timeline that we're looking at?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And great question. And I'm actually going to double down on what Emilio had shared, right? So, I mean, when we think about timeline, and when people are thinking, okay, all this money is coming out at the federal state level around go help our rural communities get connected. There's so many other moving parts, right? So all of the entities that Emilio was talking about, we are dependent, codependent. There's so many interdependencies between all of these different sort of pieces, whether it's utility organizations, pole organizations, right, that have to be coordinated and function collectively. So I definitely want to double down on everything that Emilio had said, and why that's so important from a timeline perspective. I also think, sort of two other aspects. One is, I frankly think, because there's so much attention on this, and rightfully so, right? I think this is one of our most important issues that we need to address of our times for society and humanity. I would truly believe that if we don't fix this or address this digital divide at this point, it's just going to grow bigger and get harder to get our arms around. But at the same time, there needs to be coordination across federal, state, and local governments, right? Because they're all they have all different levels of understanding. They have all different levels of resources. They have all different levels of being able to address this issue. And so there's sort of that coordination piece within government. And then I think there's this public-private partnership aspect, which I think Amelia was also getting at, that's also necessary to get this right. But one of the things that definitely keeps me up at night is that when we think about all these monies that are coming out, every state is developing its own program, right? They're all going to have their own approach based, of course, on sort of their demographics and their needs and so forth. But as each state develops its own approach, based on perhaps different timelines, right? What happens when we think about the equity conversation and how are we getting to all of our communities, and are we going to get to them all at the same time so that we're actually moving the needle and making sure they are part of this digital economy is going to be a challenge, right? And I think about how does that play out in terms of equity? So if one state's ahead, another state's sort of in the middle of the planning, another state's just beginning their planning. And not to mention, how are the programs actually structured within each state? And what does oversight, frankly, look like to make sure that these funds are being utilized for the actual intent that they were set out to be utilized? And so I just think that there's still a lot of pieces around this that need to be defined and need to be structured to make sure that the communities who are in the most need are actually being given the care and attention that they need for connectivity, and that there is sort of accountability around this as well. Again, thinking about all the various coordination pieces, either within government, within private industry, or across, and then these partnerships that I think are so critical, because we do need to be aligned with our community partners just as much to get some of these programming to really get the benefit and the outcomes we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for laying that out. And I agree. I mean, it's not just education of like the general public about ACP, but I do know that a lot of government officials who are making policies around this also need to be educated on the realities of actual deployment. Like Amelia, you said, it takes a lot of time and research and stuff like that. Anais, what about you? What are some things that you're seeing that need to happen on both the federal government or the government side and industry?
Government usually have good intentions when they, move some of these very big programs like ACP out to the community. But usually they forget that a large part of the community really have language barrier, cultural barrier, income barriers, and it's not easily. They don't understand that you have to really go partner with someone that the community trusts, particularly with refugees and immigrant communities. Sometimes they came from countries that are very leery or very suspicious of government. And sometimes, despite that there's, this $30 to pay for your internet out there, but if they didn't understand or have someone to explain it to them or help them, get onto the program, they're likely to just forgo it. So I think that programs like ACP or other low-income programs that federal government came out when they try to address the broadband, equity kind of a program, you really need to go back to the community and first identify the barriers and then find the community partners like Elka and both Emilio are saying, find the trusted parties that people go to already for social services, nutrition meals, childcare, and then you add on, the broadband issues with them. Now they have someone to say, oh, if I get on it, will I get in trouble? Will I get deported? Will the government, do something to me? All of those. So if they have that assurance, then I think that the program could move pretty smoothly. But for example, when the state came out, when California came out with the broadband project, we applied for and got 180 devices, iPads, to be shared, right, with the low-income seniors and families. But there are a lot of rules and limitations. Should it be a loan program? Should it be straight ownership? How do we guarantee that the people that got these devices are using it, and so on and so forth? So it does take quite a while for both our local Department of Disabilities and Aging, we call DAS, right, to work out those issues with the community partners. And then we, go out and then get those people that needed these devices and get them on the device. But it really takes time. So I would say that with government partners, first, with a good intent is great, but do look for the trusted partners that could be like your spokespeople, your liaisons, and for sure they're going to need some language and direct assistance to get on these wonderful programs. So it's very important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, the FCC has been doing some outreach. NTIA has been doing some outreach to community organizations that are connected, like the trusted voices that have language accessibility. But I think also there's that education piece there too, is that there's money out there for these community organizations to do the education and outreach efforts to our community that can tap into ACP and such. So yeah, thank you, Annie. So next, and my last question of this conversation, because I think, now we kind of see what are kind of the barriers, what are we working on right now, but what's next, or what's on your radar in the coming year or so? I know midterms elections are coming up. The FCC has a couple of new things on their agenda, and so from your organization standpoint, community organization or your industry company, what's on your radar right now in terms of closing the digital divide, some things that you're monitoring? So we'll start with Anais. What is T-Mobile looking to right now or working on?
Yeah, so, after the T-Mobile Sprint merger, T-Mobile is just working on being the best carrier out there, being the most customer friendly, and really solving those customer pain points. And we've seen some quarters of pretty impressive growth. We're also, launching new products like the in-home broadband that I mentioned, but we're just trying to get as many people on the T-Mobile nationwide 5G network. And that's kind of exciting. On the homework gap or digital divide, we're focusing on these small hometown rural grants in which we identify, small cities or small towns across all America that are considered rural, so size and location. And we're funding projects all across the United States. And that's been really impressive, whether it's connecting, a lab or whether it's a baseball field, like things that these communities really need. And we're getting into these communities in a really resourceful and creative way. We're, trying to grow our in-home broadband and giving consumers choices. You should be able to choose who your provider is. And we think that that's really key. And we also hope that choice is obviously us. And then just going back to the technical, ensuring that spectrum pipeline and that spectrum auction authority is extended on a short-term 18-month basis is really key to ensure that us in the private sector continue working efficiently as we can to grow our spectrum assets and bring those benefits to American consumers. And the digital divide, we all play a very important part. And I think the pandemic brought broadband to the forefront of a lot of people's minds, because we don't realize how much we rely on our broadband or wireless service. And I think it's key that any legislation that continues to be passed and any funds that are allocated towards broadband take into consideration tech neutrality, which means that you're meeting the customer where they are. They may not be needing, cable or their fixed wireless, but they might be, moving from place to place. And so wireless and their phone and that mobility that wireless provides is really key. And we've seen that through the pandemic, and we see that in our business models moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Emilio?
I think there are a number of things that are important to closing the divide, and I think the ACP program and the BEAD, which you've mentioned, are historical steps in that direction. I worked for the Clinton administration many years ago when we started a grant program to connect nonprofits to this thing at the time called the Information Superhighway. And back then, I believe our budget was just under 30 million. So these are big investments that are necessary, particularly if we're going to connect rural America and give them access to broadband that is worthy of what they need. I would say a couple of things. Overall, from a big picture point of view, I think any of us in industry, we need predictability so we can plan and invest. And that means, clear rules and policies of the road for things like, for example, we need a national online privacy bill that protects consumers, gives them the rights they need, but also gives us clarity as to how to handle information and data. So, for example, in a mobile world where you might be starting a call in Maryland, drive through DC and end up in Virginia, it's very hard to have three different set of rules as you move. So, we're looking to Congress to hopefully come up with a bipartisan compromise and provide a meaningful set of privacy rules and protections for consumers, and that give us clarity so we can protect their data and continue to move forward there. I think access to spectrum, which is the lifeblood of wireless, is also an important one. Talk about timing and deployment. On average, between securing spectrum at auction and putting it to work and clearing that band and testing it, you're talking anywhere from 5 to 10 years to make that a reality. So the more the FCC can put out there quickly, the more all of us benefit on this. And finally, I would mention that ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program, has been a great success. To date, I believe over 13 million subscribers are benefiting from this. Comcast, T-Mobile, Verizon, we all providing a suite of services that with the $30 discount, you basically have free wire or wireless broadband, depending on your needs and wants. The program has been successful, but that also means that the program, which is basically Congress allocated about 5 years of funding for, is starting to face some constraints financially. And there are projections from some very credible economists that it could be late 2023, very early 2024, that the funding might run out. So I put that out there for APAICS and for the community advocates to start thinking about how do we encourage continuation of this great program that has finally helped so many families get and stay connected.
Thank you, Emilio. Alka, how about you? What's next?
Sure, and I'm gonna continue the thread on ACP for a moment because I really think from a grassroots level, right? I think one of the biggest challenges that we've seen, and Annie's touched on this already, but I do want to double down on it, is awareness. Are our communities even aware that ACP is available, right? So how do we really tackle awareness and outreach? And so one of the things that we've been doing a lot around is going out into these communities and just making sure that they are aware of it. And frankly, even some local elected officials who may not be aware of it, right? And so doing a lot of education and awareness as well as outreach. I do want to say too, as Annie was talking, and she was talking about how some of these communities are leery about trusting government. That's true, right? I mean, as part of this program, you do have to enter some information. And for those who might be a little bit concerned about what they're entering, how it's going to be utilized is always a consideration. But having said that, signing up for anything in the federal government, for the most part, I used to work in the federal government, so I hope people don't mind me saying this, but can be a challenge. And so again, how do we sit down with individuals and actually be partners in helping them get through that process? Because it's not easy, right? And especially for the individuals who need it the most, it can be very daunting. And so really a big focus on our end is how do we really advance awareness, outreach, and then assist individuals who need to sign up? And I think that's really how we move the needle, at least on a grassroots level. The other pieces I'll just share again, because part of my role is really being on the ground and working with these community partners on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm really proud too that Comcast this year has announced its $1 billion commitment under its Project Up umbrella. And so the LIP zones that I had mentioned earlier sort of falls under that umbrella. But another one that I want to highlight is our RISE program as well, which is really focused on minority small businesses. And we know these small businesses are the heart of our communities. And so how are we also caring for those organizations, and especially minority owned, especially coming out of the pandemic and so forth. And so how can we support them? And so how do we continue to do that as part of our plan as well? And then really, again, with my lens of being on the ground, we'll say working with community partners to advance the concept of being digital navigators. So how does that play out, whether it plays out in terms of the ACP signups? And I should say too, another point Annie had raised, which was really spot on, was around language access, especially for our communities. I mean, how many languages within the Asian umbrella are there? And so we've been really taking the lead internally around pushing and making sure that our materials are accessible in various languages. And so we've got them available in over 35 languages, over 10 Asian languages, and continuing to increase that number because we know that is one of those barriers. But how do we think about opportunities and programs, whether it be around digital literacy? This intergenerational program that Annie's talking about is phenomenal, right? Because how do you're creating trust. Oftentimes seniors, and I'll say my parents even, they won't come to me with their tech issues. They'll go to my kids, right? And so, frankly, I go to my kids sometimes too. But, how do we sort of create and build that trust? And trust comes in many different ways. Trust comes in many different forms. Trust is different for different communities. And so how do we address that? How do we find a solution to really advancing that? And whether it be organizations like self-help, our library institutions, our boys and girls clubs, things of that nature, and even OCA, right? I know we're doing some programs with OCA. And so there are already organizations that are on the ground doing this. And so let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's figure out how we partner together to really maximize on the results that we're looking forward to. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alka. Yeah, the intergenerational piece also is really important. I mean, I think even in our own offices, as we're seeing, new generation of workers showing within the office, the digital divide and digital literacy there too, right? Annie, you've been doing some great programs during the pandemic when the world was virtually online, basically online. And now we're kind of moving into kind of a hybrid. Some are moving back in person. So what's next for you in terms of what you're doing in your community for the seniors and their families?
I think as Elker and as Emilio and as Anis say, closing the digital divide is our priority, almost number one, because it's almost like a what we call a human rights issue nowadays. It's not only just a necessity, right, to have internet. If you have children and you've all read about stories how the kids have to go by to a McDonald's in order to do their homework, it's just so heartbreaking, right? Why the richest and the strongest country in the world had population that are still so underprivileged and underserved. And so closing this gap is kind of like closing the poverty gap, is a top priority for government, industry leaders, as well as community organizations. So for us, as long as there's still a divide, we need to find some ways to get devices, get the iPads, the Chromebooks, the tablets, the smartphones to our low-income communities to help them bridge this digital divide. And secondly, whenever we think of there's federal, state, and local programs that are available, we at the community need to aggressively go look for those funding and in a way fight for them. And as Emilio pointed out, we cannot let ACP just stop, right? After you get 20 million people on the program, then you say, oh, sorry, starting next year, there's going to be no more subsidy. So where do people turn? So we just have to continue to advocate that our leaders would continue this type of subsidy so that the community that needed the connectivity, the affordable connectivity, will continue to have it. So we're going to continue work with our partners to make sure that it doesn't just stop in 2024, but it will continue. So, but we need our government leaders, elected officials, to know that 99% of the public assistance programs you have to apply online. Probably 100% of all job application, even down to the minimum pay jobs, you have to go online now and apply. So how could you leave out even 10% of our community that is not connected? That's really an issue that we all have to think about. But I want to say that while we work so hard, but we're really grateful and thankful for community supporters, really like our telecom and other carriers that care for the community. And without us asking every year, Elka, Lorena, can you continue our funding? They come to us and say, Annie, we have this money set aside for the 40 internet essential classes. Can you program them and schedule them? So there's a continuity, of this efforts going on. I forgot to mention that for 12 years, we were supported by, again, Comcast on the Digital Connector program. These are high school kids that go through one semester of leadership training and on how to, utilize technology to further their career and their studies. But at the end of the semester, these kids are asked to do a community service project. And throughout the past 12 years, our graduates have been coming back to the community and help train and teach the essential classes to the elderly, to the families with children, to the kids. So I thought that this intergeneration and continuous partnership provides such a positive impact, on the community, that we just have to believe that with the support, with the government partnership and the community partners, that we could really make a real effort to close the divide in a certain number of years. And I hope that maybe within 10 years, we could say 100% of the Americans enjoy high-speed broadband. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep pushing and working hard. Yeah.
Thank you, Annie. Yeah, and I can add to that for OCA, what's on our radar for bridging the digital divide is also the data disaggregation, right? We're all here for APAICS, so we're all representing the Asian Pacific American community in one way or another. And one of the misconceptions out there is that all Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders are connected to the internet, but they're not, right? And there's a gap of information there that I know OCA is working on. All of our partners here are working on. So it's really important because we're not a monolith. We're not a model minority. In fact, one of my good friends who is an Ivy graduate, his family home didn't get Wi-Fi connection until after he had graduated and was able to, and that was in the past couple of years, right? So it's quite, these stories are every day around us that we know we need to shed light on. And I mean, that's why we're having this panel as well. So thank you for the call to actions from everyone, right? I think the number one takeaway is that ACP needs to have continued funding, along with continued partnerships between government, industry, and our community partners. Once again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to enlighten us on kind of what you're working on and what barriers there are. Thank you to APAICS for hosting the Tech Summit. We look forward to hearing other enlightening conversations about tech and digital literacy in the future. So thank you all.
Great, thank you.